For years, the royal vault beneath Windsor remained untouched, sealed by tradition, guarded by silence, and protected by secrets no one dared question. But when Prince Edward finally stepped forward and confirmed what lay inside, even the most seasoned palace insiders were left stunned. Because what Prince Philip left behind wasn't just art, it was a message, a decision, and a choice that would change Edward's place in royal history forever. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The royal vault had always existed as something more than stone and steel. It was not merely a chamber beneath Windsor. It was a boundary between public history and private truth, between what the world was allowed to see and what the crown chose to protect. After Prince Philip's passing, the vault was sealed with the same quiet finality that marked his farewell to public life. No announcements were made, no ceremonies acknowledged its existence. Even those who had served Philip faithfully for decades were left outside its authority, told only that his personal effects would be handled in accordance with his private wishes. Time moved forward, as it always did, and the world assumed everything within that vault would follow tradition, distribution, cataloguing, quiet division among heirs. Nothing controversial, nothing personal. That assumption, however, would not survive the moment Edward broke his silence. Edward did not step forward with triumph. He did not offer smiles, nor did he cloak his confirmation in royal ceremony. Instead, he spoke with the restraint of someone carrying a truth too heavy to be displayed lightly. Those who listened closely noticed something deeper in his tone. Not surprise, not confusion, but recognition, as though he had been waiting for this moment long before anyone else realized it was coming. The palace staff, trained to anticipate every procedural outcome, had expected routine allocations. Philip's possessions, though deeply personal, were still bound by royal tradition. Division ensured balance, balance ensured peace. That was how it had always been done. But whispers began circulating even before Edward confirmed the truth. Whispers that the vault contained something intentionally preserved, something untouched by administrative hands, something shielded not by oversight, but by design. These whispers unsettled those who understood the meaning behind royal inheritance, because within this family, nothing was ever simply given. Every gesture carried weight, every decision carried consequence. What Edward confirmed would soon ripple through every corridor of royal memory. The contents of the vault were not fragmented, they were not distributed, they were not shared, they had been left entirely to him. Entirely. The word itself carried a force that could not be softened. Entirely meant Philip had made a choice. Entirely meant Philip had seen something in Edward that no one else had fully understood. Entirely meant that what rested inside that vault was never meant to belong to anyone else. And it was not the monetary value that unsettled palace observers. It was the emotional declaration hidden beneath it. Because Philip was not a man who made sentimental gestures without purpose. His life had been defined by precision, discipline, and restraint. Every decision had been deliberate. Every silence had been intentional. Which meant this decision, this final act of personal inheritance, had been years in the making. Edward's calm acceptance revealed even more than his words. He did not react like a man receiving an unexpected gift. He reacted like a man fulfilling a responsibility he had long anticipated. Those who watched him carefully could sense the emotional gravity behind his composure. He understood what this meant, not just for himself, but for how Philip had seen him all along. The quiet son, the overlooked son, the son who had never demanded recognition, yet had somehow earned something far greater. In that moment, Edward's identity within the royal family began to shift, no longer defined by absence or distance, but by something far more powerful: trust. Trust forged not in public ceremony, but in private understanding. And as the truth settled into the consciousness of those who served the crown, one question began to echo louder than all others. Why Edward? Why only him? Because to understand why Edward, and why only Edward, you must go back decades, to the silent bond forged between father and youngest son that few ever truly saw. He was never the heir, never the rebel, never the scandal. Prince Edward existed in the shadows of louder headlines and heavier expectations. While Charles carried the crown, Anne carried the steel, and Andrew carried controversy, Edward carried something else, silence. But behind that silence was a relationship with Prince Philip unlike any other. One built not on duty, but on trust, and perhaps on understanding that no one else could ever replace. From the very beginning, Edward's life unfolded differently from his siblings. He was born into the same bloodline, raised beneath the same ancient expectations, yet the world never watched him with the same intensity. There were no grand predictions attached to his name, no looming destiny he was forced to carry before he could even understand its weight. Instead, he grew up observing, listening, existing in the spaces between louder personalities and heavier burdens. Charles was shaped by inevitability, groomed from childhood to carry a crown he could never refuse. Anne was defined by resilience, admired for her strength, and feared for her unwavering resolve. Andrew became a figure surrounded by attention, his choices constantly amplified by scrutiny and consequence. But Edward moved quietly, untouched by both the burden of expectation and the chaos of controversy. To many, his silence appeared as absence, but to Philip, it revealed something else entirely. Philip saw beyond what others overlooked. He recognized in Edward a reflection of something deeply familiar. Not ambition, not rebellion, but steadiness. Edward did not seek validation, and perhaps that was why Philip trusted him so completely. Their connection did not rely on grand gestures or public displays. It existed in conversations that carried no audience, moments where Philip could speak, not as a symbol, but as a man. Because beneath Philip's disciplined exterior lived a complexity few ever truly understood. He carried decades of sacrifice, of standing beside a throne that was never his, of silencing parts of himself for the sake of duty. And somehow, Edward understood that weight without needing it, explained. He did not interrupt. He did not judge. He simply remained present. And in that presence, Philip found something he rarely allowed himself to feel: peace. While others were drawn outward by responsibility, Edward remained close, not out of obligation, but out of instinct. He never positioned himself for advantage, never tried to prove his worth through spectacle. His loyalty was not performed, it was lived, and Philip saw that loyalty in ways others could not. As the years passed and time began to narrow Philip's world, Edward's presence became even more constant. Conversations grew deeper, silences grew more meaningful. There were reflections Philip shared with Edward that he never entrusted to anyone else, regrets that had no place in pub, truths that could never be spoken beyond the safety of their private bond. Edward became more than a son. He became a witness, a guardian of thoughts and emotions Philip had concealed from the world. This closeness did not demand recognition. It existed quietly, protected from the expectations that governed every other royal relationship. And perhaps that was why it endured so powerfully. Because it was never built on hierarchy. It was built on understanding. Edward never needed to be the strongest, never needed to be the loudest. His strength was found in something far more enduring. His ability to remain, to listen, to carry without asking for acknowledgement. And over time, that quiet loyalty became something Philip came to depend on more than anyone realized. It was not shaped in moments of celebration, but in moments of vulnerability, not forged through shared duty, but through shared humanity. And it was within that private world, away from the weight of crowns and expectations, that Philip began preparing something only Edward would one day inherit. And nowhere was that closeness more visible than inside Philip's private art rooms, spaces no one else was ever truly invited into. Behind locked doors and away from ceremonial halls, Prince Philip kept a collection few even knew existed. It wasn't displayed. It wasn't catalogued publicly. And it wasn't meant to impress anyone. This was Philip's private world, a carefully curated reflection of his mind, his memories, and his identity beyond the crown. But what no one realized was that every piece inside carried meaning. And that meaning pointed unmistakably toward one person. For a man whose entire life had been lived beneath scrutiny, this hidden collection became Philip's only true sanctuary. It was not assembled for legacy in the traditional sense. It was assembled for truth. Each piece existed not as disem, oration, but as confession, not spoken aloud, but preserved in silence. While the world saw Philip as unbreakable, disciplined, and unwavering, these private acquisitions revealed something far more human. They revealed doubt, reflection, even vulnerability. These were not trophies of status. They were fragments of emotion, carefully chosen and fiercely protected. Philip had encountered many of these works during moments the public never witnessed. Quiet travels, unofficial pauses between obligations, private encounters where he was not acting as consort, not serving as symbol, but simply existing as himself. He was drawn not to perfection, but to honesty. Art that reflected struggle seemed to speak to him most. Pieces that carried tension, solitude, or resilience found their way into his possession, as though he saw himself within them. These acquisitions were never announced, never celebrated, because they were never meant for public admiration. They were meant for personal preservation. Philip was not building a royal collection. He was building a personal archive of his inner life, hidden behind layers of duty he had carried for decades. What made the collection even more extraordinary was its deliberate secrecy. Philip never allowed it to become part of the royal estate. He never permitted curators to categorize it or historians to interpret it. It remained outside the reach of royal documentation, protected by his direct authority, and within that protected space, Edward became something no one else was allowed to become: a witness. Philip did not show him everything at once. Instead, over time, he revealed pieces slowly, carefully, as though each one carried a story too important to rush. He spoke to Edward not about value, but about meaning, about why certain works mattered, about what they represented. These were not lessons about art. They were lessons about himself. Edward listened the way he always had, without interruption, without judgment. He understood instinctively that what Philip was sharing went far beyond paintings or sculptures. He was sharing pieces of his identity he had hidden from the world. The deeper Edward was allowed into this private world, the clearer it became that the collection was not simply something Philip owned. It was something Philip had built as an extension of his emotional survival. Every piece carried memory. Every piece carried intention. Some reflected moments of triumph, quiet victories no one had celebrated. Others reflected loneliness, the invisible cost of standing beside power without ever possessing it. These works carried truths Philip had never spoken aloud, yet he trusted Edward to understand them without explanation. And Edward did understand, not because he shared Philip's experiences, but because he shared his emotional language. Silence, restraint, endurance. Their connection deepened not through words, but through shared understanding of what those works represented. This collection was Philip's unspoken autobiography, written not in ink, but in preservation. And as the years passed, Edward began to realize something else. Philip was not simply sharing his collection, he was preparing him to carry something forward, something deeply personal, something that would only fully reveal itself when Philip was no longer there to explain it. Edward did not yet know how or when that moment would arrive, but he could feel its inevitability. The collection was never meant to disappear. It was meant to survive, and Philip had already chosen the one person he believed would protect it, not as inheritance, but as understanding. But what Edward discovered inside the vault would reveal that Philip hadn't just preserved memories he had left behind a decision no one else saw coming. When the vault doors finally opened, there was no ceremony, no announcement, no royal spectacle, only silence. Those present understood immediately that they were witnessing something deeply personal. The inventory confirmed what no one expected. Every piece, every frame, every sculpture had been assigned to one name: Prince Edward. Not shared, not divided, entirely his. And in that moment, the air inside the room shifted with consequences no one could yet measure. The opening itself had been arranged with deliberate restraint. Only a handful of trusted officials were permitted to attend, individuals bound not only by duty, but by discretion. There were no outside observers, no press, no public acknowledgement that anything extraordinary was about to unfold. The vault, long sealed under Philip's direct authority, had remained untouched since his passing. Even those who managed royal estates understood that this chamber existed beyond routine procedure. It was governed not by tradition alone, but by Philip's final instructions, and those instructions had never been revealed until now. As the inventory process began, what emerged was not confusion, but clarity. Each item had been documented meticulously, its ownership defined without ambiguity. There were no shared allocations, no conditional clauses, no symbolic distributions, meant to preserve balance among siblings. The legal documentation was unmistakable. Prince Philip had personally designated Edward as the sole inheritor of his entire private art collection. Sole inheritor. The words carried a gravity that could not be softened. They represented finality, intention, choice. Those present understood immediately that this was not a procedural outcome, it was a declaration. Philip had made this decision. Philip had made this decision knowingly, deliberately, and without compromise. He had not left room for reinterpretation. He had not left space for negotiation. This was his final assertion of trust, preserved in ink and protected in silence. Edward's reaction revealed more than any spoken statement could have. He did not appear surprised. He did not question the outcome. Instead, he absorbed the moment with a quiet stillness that suggested emotional recognition rather than shock. His composure did not hide the weight he carried. It revealed it, because Edward understood what others were only beginning to grasp. This inheritance was not about possession, it was about responsibility. It was about carrying forward something Philip had protected fiercely during his lifetime, something Philip had entrusted to no one else. Those who observed Edward closely noticed the shift in his presence, not dramatic, not outward, but undeniable. He was no longer simply a recipient. He had become a guardian of something deeply personal. Within palace circles, the news did not spread loudly. It moved quietly, carried through private conversations and unspoken acknowledgement. Reactions were controlled, as they always were within royal walls. But beneath that control lived undeniable emotion. Because those who understood Philip knew he did not make decisions based on sentiment alone. His choices were rooted in conviction, which meant this decision carried meaning beyond inheritance. It carried judgment. It carried belief. It reflected who Philip believed Edward truly was. Not in the eyes of the public, but in the truth Philip had witnessed privately, over decades of shared silence and trust. And that realization began to alter how Edward himself was perceived, not as the overlooked son, but as the chosen keeper of something no one else had been allowed to hold. The vault had not simply revealed art, it had revealed Philip's final act of intention, his final expression of trust in the one son who had never demanded recognition, yet had earned something far more profound. And as the implications of that moment began to settle, one truth became impossible to ignore. This decision was never about fairness. It was about understanding. It was about connection. It was about legacy in its purest, most personal form. Because inheritance within the royal family was never just about possessions, it was about trust, legacy, and something far more personal. The moment Edward's inheritance became known internally, reactions weren't spoken, but they were felt. Because this wasn't a shared family legacy, it was a deliberate singular choice. And in a family where symbolism carried as much weight as law, Philip's decision raised questions no one dared ask aloud. Why Edward? Why exclusively him? And what did Philip know or believe that led him to make this final, irreversible statement? The truth did not erupt in confrontation. It settled instead like an invisible pressure, quietly reshaping the emotional balance within royal walls. No official objections were raised. No public discomfort was expressed. But those who understood the language of royal silence recognized immediately that something profound had shifted. Because within this family, inheritance was never just about ownership. It was about meaning. It was about recognition. And Philip's choice had delivered both with unmistakable precision. Family members who had long understood their roles now found themselves confronting something unexpected, not because they questioned Edward, but because they questioned the message behind Philip's decision. The collection had never been part of Philip's public identity. It was not something associated with royal duty or ceremonial obligation. It was personal, deeply personal. which meant Philip had not simply passed down objects, he had passed down himself. His private world, his inner reflections, and he had Osa and Edward alone to carry them forward. This realization stirred emotions that remained carefully contained beneath practiced composure, because even without words, the implications were undeniable. Philip had seen something in Edward that he had entrusted to no one else. For Edward, the weight of that trust did not arrive with celebration. It arrived with quiet transformation. Those who observed him closely began to notice subtle changes in how he was regarded, not through official titles, not through formal acknowledgement, but through something far more powerful: perception. Edward had always existed on the periphery of royal expectation, respected but rarely central to its emotional core. Now, that perception was shifting, not because Edward had demanded it, but because Philip had defined it. Philip's decision had elevated Edward's position in a way no public honor ever could. It had revealed a private hierarchy, built not on protocol, but on emotional truth. Palace advisors, bound by discretion, began examining the deeper implications behind closed doors. They understood that Philip had been meticulous in his choices throughout his life. He did nothing without purpose, nothing without intention, which meant this inheritance was not accidental, it was deliberate. Advisors debated quietly, not over legal authority, but over symbolic consequence. What did Philip intend Edward to represent? What role had he envisioned for him beyond public recognition? These were questions no official document could answer, because Philip had not explained his reasoning. He had simply acted. Edward himself offered no public commentary beyond acknowledgement. He did not attempt to interpret Philip's decision. He did not seek to define its meaning. His silence, however, spoke louder than explanation ever could. It reflected acceptance, it reflected understanding, and perhaps most importantly, it reflected loyalty. Edward did not need to explain Philip's choice because he had lived it. He had been present for the moments that shaped it, moments no one else had witnessed, moments that had unfolded quietly, away from expectation and observation. The inheritance had not been decided in isolation, it had been shaped over years of trust, shared understanding, and emotional closeness that existed beyond public awareness. And as those truths began to settle into the royal family's collective consciousness, one thing became increasingly clear. Philip's decision had not been sudden, it had been inevitable. Because Philip's decision wasn't sudden, it had been quietly building for years, through moments only Edward fully understood. In his final years, Prince Philip spoke less but observed more. He withdrew from public duty, but not from reflection. Those closest to him noticed subtle changes. Conversations became deeper, moments became heavier, and Edward was there for all of it. Watching, listening, understanding. What no one realized was that Philip wasn't simply aging, he was preparing, quietly putting pieces into place for a final message only one person was meant to carry forward. Time, which had once been Philip's greatest adversary, now became his greatest teacher. It stripped away urgency, it stripped away distraction. What remained was clarity. The clarity to see not what the world expected of him, but what he truly wanted to leave behind. And in that quiet clarity, Edward's presence became more than comforting, it became essential. Philip no longer needed large audiences. He no longer needed the rhythm of public ceremony to define his purpose. Instead, he turned inward, toward memory, toward meaning, and toward the one person who had never demanded anything from him except honesty. Edward did not come to Philip seeking answers. He came simply to be present. And in that presence, Philip found something he had rarely allowed himself to embrace fully: freedom. Freedom to reflect without performance, freedom to speak without restraint. Their conversations shifted, moving away from daily matters and toward deeper truths. Philip began revisiting moments that had shaped him, not as a public figure, but as a man. The sacrifices, the compromises, the loneliness that had accompanied decades of standing beside power without ever possessing it. Edward listened in silence, not interrupting, not correcting, just absorbing, because he understood these were not ordinary reflections. These were fragments of Philip's inner world being entrusted to him piece by piece. At the same time, Philip became increasingly protective of his private art collection. It was no longer simply something he owned. It was something he guarded with quiet determination. He ensured its preservation, not out of possessiveness, but out of purpose. He knew exactly what it represented. It was not wealth, it was identity. Each piece carried part of his emotional history, preserved through years of private struggle and quiet resilience. Edward's presence during these moments was not accidental. Philip was allowing him to witness something deeply personal, not just the collection itself, but the meaning behind it. Edward became more than an observer, he became the keeper of understanding, the one person Philip trusted to recognize the emotional truth embedded within every carefully chosen piece. Behind closed doors, preparations were made with deliberate precision. Legal arrangements were finalized without announcement. Instructions were recorded without explanation. Philip did not seek validation for his decisions. He did not consult public expectation. He acted with emotional certainty. He knew what he was doing. He knew who he was choosing. Edward never questioned these preparations. He did not need to. He felt the significance of what was unfolding long before it was ever spoken aloud. Their bond had moved beyond words. It existed in shared silence, in mutual recognition of what was being passed from one generation to the next. Not authority, not obligation, but trust, deep, personal trust. In those final years, Philip was not preparing Edward for inheritance alone. He was preparing him for guardianship of memory, guardianship of identity, guardianship of the private man the world had never fully known. Edward became the silent keeper of Philip's emotional legacy, carrying forward something far more valuable than possession. He carried forward understanding, and when Philip's time finally came to an end, what remained behind was not uncertainty, it was intention. Intention shaped over years of quiet preparation. Intention entrusted to one son who had never needed to ask for it. And when Edward finally confirmed the truth publicly, it wasn't an announcement, it was a fulfillment of something promised long ago. Edward didn't confirm the truth with pride, he confirmed it with responsibility. His words were measured, calm, but behind them was the weight of decades of trust, because he understood something others didn't. This wasn't about ownership, it was about guardianship, about protecting something Philip had entrusted only to him. And with that confirmation, Edward stepped into a role no one had ever expected him to hold. There was no attempt to dramatize the moment, no effort to transform it into personal triumph. Instead, Edward spoke with the quiet authority of someone who understood that what he had received was not a reward, but a duty. He did not describe it as inheritance in the traditional sense. He described it as preservation, as continuity, as something far greater than possession, because Edward knew the truth others were still struggling to grasp. Philip had not simply given him art, he had given him trust in its purest form. For years, speculation had lived in the shadows of palace conversations, questions whispered quietly, but never answered publicly. Why Edward had remained so close, why Philip had chosen to share parts of himself with him that no one else had been allowed to see. Those questions ended the moment Edward confirmed the truth, not with dramatic revelation, but with calm acceptance. His words carried finality, not explanation. He did not seek to justify Philip's decision. He did not attempt to interpret it for others, because he understood something deeply personal. Philip had never intended for this decision to be explained. He had intended for it to be honored, and Edward, more than anyone else, understood what honoring it required: silence, respect, and unwavering loyalty to the meaning behind it. Edward's restraint revealed more strength than any emotional display ever could. He did not allow the weight of public attention to alter his composure. He did not embrace the sudden shift in perception that followed his confirmation. But that shift was undeniable. For years, Edward had existed quietly within the royal structure, respected but rarely central to its emotional narrative. Now, that narrative had changed. People began to see him differently, not because he had demanded recognition, but because Philip had given it. His quiet strength, once overlooked, now became the defining force behind his identity. He was no longer simply the youngest son. He had become something far more significant, the keeper of Philip's private world, the one entrusted to carry forward something no one else could fully understand. Edward never attempted to elevate himself because of this responsibility. He did not seek validation. He did not attempt to reshape High's public image. Instead, he remained exactly who he had always been. Steady, quiet, unshaken by attention or expectation, because Edward had never needed public acknowledgement to define his purpose. His purpose had been shaped long ago, in conversations no one else had heard, in moments no one else had witnessed. And now, that purpose had become visible to the world, not through ceremony, not through title, but through confirmation of Philip's final act of trust. This moment did not transform Edward into someone new. It revealed who he had always been, a son defined not by ambition, but by loyalty, not by recognition, but by understanding. And as the truth settled into public consciousness, the meaning behind Philip's decision began to unfold with even greater depth, because this was never simply about what Philip had left behind. It was about what he had seen, what he had believed, and what he had chosen Edward to protect long after he was gone. But the deeper meaning of Philip's decision was only beginning to emerge. In the end, Philip's art collection wasn't just a collection. It was a story, a map of his inner life, and he left that map to Edward, not because Edward needed the art, but because Edward understood the man behind it. This was Philip's final act of trust, his final message, and his final confirmation that sometimes the quietest son carries the deepest connection and the most important legacy of all. For decades, the world had seen Philip through the lens of duty, a figure defined by strength, discipline, and unwavering loyalty to the crown. But beneath that public identity lived a man who had sacrificed pieces of himself in silence. A man whose private thoughts had no place in royal speeches or ceremonial appearances. His art collection became the only place where those hidden parts could survive. And by leaving it entirely to Edward, Philip was not simply passing down possession. He was passing down truth. Truth about who he had been when the world wasn't watching. Truth about what he had endured without complaint. Truth about the emotional life he had trusted only Edward to understand. This decision revealed something deeper than inheritance ever could. It revealed belief. Philip believed Edward would protect not just the physical collection, but the meaning behind it. He believed Edward would understand its emotional weight without needing explanation, because Edward had already lived that understanding. He had been present for the quiet conversations. He had witnessed the reflections Philip never shared with anyone else. He had carried Philip's trust long before it was formalized in legal documents. The collection became a symbol of continuity, ensuring that Philip's private identity would not disappear with him, and Edward became the living bridge between Philip's past and the legacy he left behind. Not because Edward stood first in line, but because he stood closest in understanding. Philip's final act did not follow hierarchy, it followed connection, it followed emotional truth. He did not choose based on expectation, he chose based on certainty, certainty that Edward would protect something far more fragile than reputation, something far more personal than royal history, memory. Edward's acceptance of that responsibility transformed his place within the royal family forever. He was no longer defined by what he had not been. He was defined by what he had been trusted to carry. His quiet loyalty, once overlooked, had become his greatest strength. His silence, once misunderstood, had become his greatest proof of character. And through that transformation, Edward's royal narrative was rewritten. Not by public declaration, but by private truth. Philip never needed to explain his decision because his decision spoke key for itself. It was his final message, delivered not through words, but through action. He had spent his life standing beside power, never seeking recognition for himself. And in his final act, he chose to recognize the one person who had stood beside him without expectation. The art collection became more than legacy. It became evidence of a bond that had never needed validation. Evidence of a relationship built not on duty, but on trust. And in the end, that trust became Philip's greatest gift. Not to the crown, not to history, but to the son who had understood him completely. Edward now carries something no title could ever grant. He carries Philip's private world. He carries the emotional truth behind a lifetime of silent endurance. And through that responsibility, he ensures that Philip's identity will not fade into the distance of public memory. It will live on, preserved not in ceremony, but in understanding. Because in the end, the vault didn't just reveal art, it revealed the truth about loyalty, trust, and the son Philip believed would protect his legacy forever. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.